There's very little in life that's worth achieving that isn't hard. Those things that are hard because most people can't do it. That's why we say they're hard. If you work at it and achieve it, and you continue that throughout your life, you are distinguishing yourself among others around you by what you have achieved. And those who rise the highest are those who keep solving hard things. Leads me to the famous quote from John Kennedy: we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy.
They are easy, but because they are hard.
Zero.
Hard work dissipates ignorance.
You said you're told it, so you have to believe it. I will never require you to believe anything.
Good for you.
It will only ever be about how compelling is the evidence to you.
If you have religious faith, then whatever anyone says about the world wouldn't matter to you. If it does matter to you, then that's a different kind of contract that you're taking out on information. And that contract is, there could be data out there that would conflict with your religious philosophy, and then you'd have to go along with it. That's not what actually happens. There's a pretense that data matters, and then they filter it, reinterpret it, ignore parts of it, slice and dice it so that it all fits in to the religious philosophy. So it requires blinders in order to make that happen.
Copernicus could not shake the idea of orbits that were perfect circles. They couldn't shake that. Why would God design a universe with a shape that wasn't geometrically perfect? So even Copernicus, putting the sun back in the middle of the known universe, had circular orbits. And since the orbits are not circles, they actually differed from predictions on the night sky. So that was a problem at the time. It's like Copernicus, this might work, but it still doesn't fit. The epicycles are doing much better. And so it wasn't instantly taken up, including the resistance, the church resistance, of course, because Earth wasn't in the middle anymore. Our counterpart to what I think you're describing is the urge to try to presume nature was perfect and then account for it with everything we know that is.
I see myself as a responsible educator. And in that role, if you want to put your creation philosophies into a science classroom, I'm going to stand at the gate and prevent that. Science is about taking the unknown and figuring it out.
Right.
Intelligent design, as presented in the Dover trial, and as is widely discussed, takes what is unknown and then doesn't try to figure it out. It says we can't figure it out and ascribes it to a higher intelligence. Right. End of story. It's not science. Therefore, it does not belong in the science classroom. You want to put it somewhere, it's fine. Put it in philosophy class or history class or religion class. It's not science.
You go online and in a Google search, you type God's worshipped by humans. There's a tally of all the gods ever worshipped by humans in the history of civilization. And it just goes screen after screen after screen after screen. So when you say, do you believe in God, which God? Is it Zeus? Is it Poseidon? Is it the Jewish God? Is it the Christian God? Because the Jewish God from the Old Testament is filled with wrath and smoting and smiting and whatever the past tense verb is. And so, and the New Testament, God is kinder, all right?
A little nicer, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So you look at all of this and say, is that the God you want me to comment on? Or is there some other God? Typically, it's the Judeo-Christian blend there. In that context, I would say in my studies of the universe, I value evidence, and I don't see evidence for any kind of active intelligence or power over anything.
The more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good. That's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why religions are called faiths, collectively, because you believe something in the absence of evidence. That's what it is. That's why it's called faith. Otherwise, we would call all religions evidence, but we don't, for exactly that reason. So I'm given what everyone describes to be the properties that would be expressed by an all-powerful being in the gods that they worship. I look for that in the universe and I don't find it. So I remain unconvinced. But if you've got some good evidence, bring it, bring it, bring it. Okay? And so I don't lead with that information because what I believe should be irrelevant to anyone. It's not about me. It's about the real world.
I gotta try to use your logic back at you. But don't we define what is good and what is bad?
So we see a tsunami wipe out a whole bunch of people, and we're as human beings going, wow, that's bad, because we define what bad is. Maybe in God's brain, eyes, whatever the hell, that's not bad.
Well, but except you defined what God is.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Now you did it.
That's
So why do you have the power to define who and what God is,
right,
but not have the power to define what good is?
Yeah, my point is we just don't know it all. Not even close.
Sure. So therefore, if you're going to say God actually is good, and 250,000 people dying from an earthquake and a tsunami and other natural disasters, right, and God presumably has control over that, and God is good, then we have to then say God works in mysterious ways, right?
There you go.
That's that. But people only say that when their understanding of God fails them.
When
right?
it's something bad.
No, when they can't understand it, they say, well, God works in mysterious ways. But somehow, in these other ways, you did understand him.
Right.
How are you saying, well, this is the handiwork of God, is you doing God's work. God wants you to do this. Somehow you know God's motives every other way.
Mm-hmm.
But when 250,000 people get wiped out, God works in mysterious ways.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you even claim to have access to God's mind in some contexts and not others?
Yeah, exactly.
Just admit you have no clue,
right,
and get on with life. That's how I look at it. As you ascend from the earth and look at our temporal, spatial, and organizational insignificance in terms of the scale of the cosmos, if you're going to say that the same person who made the cosmos cares about your life on this earth, the bigger we know the cosmos to be, the more of an expression of hubris or ego that represents. And then you end up drifting away from the idea that the person who made the universe cares about your prayers. And so it's a plausibility argument. I wouldn't call it a scientific experiment, but in science, you always have to make a judgment as to what is sensible given the information and what is not. And the bigger is the universe, the less sensible a personal God seems. As a scientist, if you are religious and you say something that is patently, objectively false, I will tell you. I'm not going to respect your views if they're objectively false, as I owe that to your intellect to explain to you what is objectively true in the face of what you think is true, want to be true, or wish for what is true. I respect your freedom to think whatever you want. But if you're going to make a decision based on something that's objectively false, that emanates from your belief system, no matter what it is, I'm obligated. As an educator, I say, that's not going to work. Or here's why it's not going to work. Well, you're advising someone else who doesn't know better. And that's not in their best interest. Yeah, I'm going to say that. It's not that religious people mess up society. That's the wrong way to look at this. The issue is dogma in any form messes up society. You can have political dogma, which has no less guilt messing up society as religious dogma. The issue here is dogma. You fight dogma. And if it happens to be under the guise of religion, fine. But as an educated scientist, atheist, if you're going to go out there and fight religious people, you're really fighting dogma, where people want you to believe something in the absence of evidence and make that policy, make that educational curricula, make legislation based on that. That's where you have problems. And that's where you get Nazism. That's where you get the Lysenkoism. Yes. That's where you get all of these isms that have risen up, that had, some of them even had some patina of being academically derived, but when you actually part the curtains, there is dogmatic invocation of rules established by some committee of people who decide how they want you to think about all the various topics.
I agree. When
My impact would be people learn from me in a way that they are empowered by what I taught them. So that when they think of what they learned from me, they no longer think of me. They think of their own base of understanding of how this world works. And so that I become irrelevant from that exercise. And because if people say, this is true because Tyson said so, then I failed. That's not how you teach someone. That's teaching them by authority. I don't, that's, no. I want to teach you how to think about the world, and then you say, I have a new way to understand the world, and you just run off. You don't even look back, because a new level of hunger has descended upon you, and methods and tools to feed that hunger are now accessible to you. So my impact would be that others are impacted and they don't even remember that I had something to do with it. On my tombstone, I want the epitaph, be ashamed to die until you have scored some victory for humanity. That's Horace Mann.
I can get behind that.
And a victory for humanity is not a victory for yourself. It's not statues, it's not your name, it's just humanity's better off. Any of us, I think, should want the world to be a little better off for you having lived in it. That doesn't mean people praising you, no, not even about that. But what do you have to give with no expectation of return? The measure of whether you'll learn something is not whether it was obviously true to you upon first glance.
Here we are on a planet which is about 5,000 million years old. The sun around which it goes is not much older. It is part of a galaxy which is perhaps 10 or 12,000 million years old, which is one of perhaps hundreds of thousands of millions of other galaxies. And none of this, planets, suns, galaxies, was around at the time of the Big Bang. At the time of the Big Bang, there was energy, elementary particles, which slowly evolved into the kind of universe we know today. We are the product of a grand evolutionary sequence, cosmic evolution, about which we are only occasionally aware. One of the great accomplishments of Dr. Hawking is to plug us better in to the knowledge of this long evolutionary sequence.
There are many hypotheses in science which are wrong. That's perfectly all right. It's the aperture to finding out what's right. Science is a self-correcting process. To be accepted, new ideas must survive the most rigorous standards of evidence and scrutiny. The suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or in politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there's no place for it in the endeavor of science.
Our ability to understand things instantly, so-called common sense, derives from a certain range of size and speed and duration that are appropriate for human existence. We know about things from 1/10 of a millimeter to a few kilometers, from a fraction of a second to a lifetime, and so on. So when we are dealing with matters of quantum physics, where particles have a size of 10 to the minus 13th centimeters, or in cosmology, where we are talking about 10 billion light years or more, it is very reasonable that our intuition is not adequate to the task. One point I'd like to make about this is that every human culture has a set of creation myths, but they're in the realm of mythology or religion or folklore, and they are, of course, all mutually inconsistent. The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there, to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology.
The thing about science is, first of all, it's after the way the universe really is, and not what makes us feel good. And a lot of the competing doctrines are after what feels good, and not what's true.
Okay.
I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work, and the essence of religion is not to change anything. That supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that, because all the truth is thought to be in hand. My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change.
It's not that pseudoscience and superstition and New Age so-called beliefs and fundamentalist zealotry are something new. They've been with us for as long as we've been human. But we live in an age based on science and technology with formidable technological powers.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
That's right. And if we don't understand it, by we, I mean the general public, if it's something that, oh, I'm not good at that, I don't know anything about it, then who is making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children live in? This combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson lay great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us. What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence. And if the universe does not comply with our predispositions, okay, then we have the wrenching obligation to accommodate to the way the universe really is.
So you step forward to say, I deny all religion because I can't see it proved scientifically?
No. You see,
the value of religious experience and the value of reaching for higher experiences.
Let me say, religion deals with history, with poetry, with great literature, with ethics, with morals, including the morality of treating compassionately the least fortunate among us. All of these are things that I endorse wholeheartedly. Where religion gets into trouble is in those cases that it pretends to know something about science. The science in the Bible, for example, was acquired by the Jews from the Babylonians during the Babylonian captivity of 600 BC. That was the best science on the planet then. But we've learned something since then. Roman Catholicism, Reformed Judaism, most of the mainstream Protestant denominations have no difficulty with the idea that humans have evolved from other creatures, that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, with the Big Bang. They don't have any trouble with that. The trouble comes with people who are biblical literalists, who believe that the Bible is dictated by the creator of the universe to an unerring stenographer.
And so therefore they...
And has no metaphor or allegory.
And from there they make their political and economic choices. And social choices.
And scientific.
And scientific choices. And scientific. And that's part of your problem with that idea.
Exactly.
It is that because for the wrong reasons we make the wrong choices about science.
That's right. So who is more humble? The scientist who looks at the universe with an open mind and accepts whatever the universe has to teach us, or somebody who says everything in this book must be considered the literal truth, and never mind the fallibility of all the human beings involved in the writing of this book?
My question is, given all these demotions, what is your personal religion, or is there any type of God to you? Like, is there a purpose, given that we're just sitting on this speck in the middle of this sea of stars?
Now, I don't want to duck any questions, and I'm not going to duck this one. But let me ask you, what do you mean when you use the word God?
It seems that through the ages, humans have created a mythological framework that has always involved some kind of higher spiritual powers. And as
every human culture has done,
as that goes away, as we know more and more and it seems harder and harder to prove that anything might exist like that, where does that leave us?
On our own. Which to my mind is much more responsible than hoping that someone will save us from ourselves so we don't have to make our best efforts to do it ourselves. And if we're wrong, and there is someone who steps in and saves us, okay, that's all right. I'm for that, but we, hedged our bets. It's Pascal's bargain run backwards. I'll say another word. The word God covers an enormous range of different ideas, and you recognize that in the way you phrased the question. Running from an outsized, light-skinned male
with a long white beard sitting in a throne in the sky and tallying the fall of every sparrow, for which there is no evidence. To my mind, if anybody has some, I sure would like to see it. To the kind of God that Einstein or Spinoza talked about, which is very close to the sum total of the laws of the universe. Now, it'd be crazy to deny that there are laws in the universe. And if that's what you want to call God, then of course God exists. And there are all sorts of other nuances. There is, for example, the deist God that many of the founding fathers of this country believed in, although it is a secret whose name may not be spoken in some circles, a roi fainéant, a do-nothing king, the God who creates the universe and then retires, and to whom praying to is sort of pointless. He's not here. He went somewhere else. He had other things to do. Now, that's also a God. So when you say, do you believe in God? If I say yes or if I say no, you have learned absolutely nothing.
I guess I'm asking you to define yours if you have one.
But why would we use a word so ambiguous that means so many different things?
It gives you freedom to define it.
It gives you freedom to seem to agree with someone else with whom you do not agree. It covers over differences. It makes for social lubrication, but it is not an aid to truth, in my view. And therefore, I think we need much sharper language when we ask these questions. I lost both my parents about 12 or 15 years ago, and I had a great relationship with them. I really miss them. I would love to believe that their spirits were around somewhere. And I'd give almost anything to spend 5 minutes a year with them. We demand the most rigorous standards of evidence, especially on what's important to us. So if some guy comes up to me, and a channeler or a medium, and says, I can put you in touch with your parents. Well, because I want so terribly to believe that, I know I have to reach in for added reserves of skepticism, because I'm likely to be fooled and much more minor to have my money taken.
We do have the gift of pattern seeking in our minds, and we will pursue this gift, often at our own expense, but at great hazard and often with great ingenuity. That has a plus side and a minus side. It often means that we prefer a junk explanation to no explanation at all, or a conspiracy theory to no theory. And religion takes its place in our evolution in this precise manner. It's the first and worst explanation we came up with. It's the best we could do when we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with big fissures in its crust. When we didn't know there were microorganisms that had power over us, we didn't have dominion over them. To the contrary. When we didn't know we lived on a spherical planet, we didn't know we revolved around other spherical bodies, everything was terrifying, new, mysterious, and often lethal. It was our first attempt at philosophy in that way, first attempt at cosmology, first attempt at geography, biology, all the rest of it. A hopeless attempt belonging to the bawling, fearful, ignorant childhood of our species, but very necessary. And it possesses still the advantage of having come first. The terrible advantage over the mind and over learning that it possesses is its originality. And the history of human emancipation is the struggle to get away from this terrifying, foolish, ignorant first try.
The species left Africa about 75,000 years ago, having probably shrunk down to about 2,000 or 3,000 people as a result of a terrible climatic disturbance, probably from Indonesia, probably from a predecessor of Krakatoa, which meant that we were this close to joining the 99.8% of all species ever living on the surface of this planet who became extinct. Some design, by the way. Profuse creation of millions and millions and millions of life forms, all to be wiped out, with not even anyone left to testify to their previous existence. We nearly joined that lot. Managed to get out of it just in time. Suppose we've only been around for 75,000 years. Monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, shows up, what, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago at the most. So if you give me my most microscopically small assumption of human existence, for at least 70,000 years, heaven watches as the human species is born, dies, usually of its teeth, usually at about 20, watches this with indifference. Thousands and thousands of generations, miserable, illiterate, starving, hungry, to say nothing of the wars they'll fight with each other, to say nothing of the cruelties they will inflict, as well as the ones they will suffer just from existence. And only 3 or 4, perhaps 5,000 years ago, heaven decides it's enough of that. It's time for an intervention. And the best way to do it would be in the most primitive part of the Middle East, not in China where people can read and have looked at telescopes. No, in the most primitive part of the Middle East, basically by offering human sacrifice to them. This is a doctrine that cannot be believed by anyone who's studied anything scientific, anything historical, anything archaeological, anything paleological, anything biological. Can't be believed by anyone. It can't be only believed by someone who wants to be a plaything and a slave of a pitiless totalitarian power.
Whereas, is it not written that I come not to bring a peace but a sword? Surely it is. Is it not written that those who won't follow me must depart and be cast into everlasting fire? Not a very gentle or pacific remark. Is it not said that if you don't give up your family, if you don't give up thrift, if you don't give up everyone who loves you and everything you love to sacrifice yourself for me, you're not worthy? These are strongly coercive and implicitly authoritarian or even totalitarian statements. And as C.S. Lewis rightly says, it's one of the very rare occasions where I agree with him, he said, you may not say that the preachments of Jesus of Nazareth are all right, even if you don't accept the religious basis of them. Lewis quite correctly says, if you don't accept that this man was the Son of God, you'll have to notice that many of his statements and sermons are either wicked or insane, or both. It's only on the belief that the world is very soon coming to an end, and that he himself has the right to claim a messianic role in this conclusion, that any of it can make any sort of sense at all. And everyone here knows at least some of the examples of what would be counted as wicked or insane if the messianic claims were found to be questionable, which they have been. I'm a Navy brat myself. I'm from Portsmouth, and there's a famous story about a young officer undergoing a rigorous examination to pass for captain. And he's told to picture himself on a leeward shore with a very strong wind driving him towards the rocks. He's asked, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'll cram on all sail and steer to starboard, hard down on the tiller and on the wheel. He said, but the wind keeps coming. You're still being driven on. What are you going to do now? He said, cram on more sail and keep the wheel very hard down away from the leeward side. And they said, but you're still being driven onto those rocks, young man. What are you going to do now? Just cram on more sail and keep the rudder and the tiller hard down on the starboard side. And he's interrupted. He said, where are you getting all this extra sail from? And he says, the same place you're getting all your extra wind from. I want to warn you, as I close, ladies and gentlemen, against the dangers of tautology. If everything that cannot be explained, everything that is mysterious to us, numinous say, or transcendent, must therefore be laid to the charge or the credit of a supernatural being, then nothing remains to be explained. Everything is in potential explicable. There's no problem to begin with. There's no point in this argument. Of course there's no mystery. There's no need for cogitation. There's no need for reflection. It must be part of a divine plan. I hope you can see the fallacy that protrudes from that conclusion too.
I remember being asked by one of my children once, when I said, well, what was there at the Big Bang? And I said, well, you have to imagine, this shows how poverty-stricken our own vocabulary is, and I suspect how poverty-stricken our own capacity is. In other words, I think there are some things, not that we don't understand or know, but that we cannot. So we're reduced to sort of primitive images. But I said, suppose you could picture all of matter, the whole of matter, condensed into something like a very small, dense black suitcase of the kind you see people carrying money in crime thrillers. And it's about to fly open. That's what you'd have to be able, and everything that's ever going to be is inside that. That was the best I could do. And I don't think many people could do, if I say it myself, that much better. But I was completely unhorsed because the kids said, well, what was outside the suitcase? And I thought, oh, well, I can't do that. And I don't know anyone who can. And that, in a way, would be my whole point. I don't have to know. You do. You're the one who says you know, not me. The theist and the deist say, oh, come on, we know. This is only possible with an author. It's only possible with a creator. It's only possible with a master and commander. It's only possible with a dictator. You're welcome. I don't need 5 minutes.
I wrote a book once about a famous building called the Parthenon, without which I could not be, without which our civilization couldn't be. Pre-Christian, by the way, as is a huge amount of the civilization that Habermas claims to be inspired by it. That to one side. The symmetry and the beauty and the frozen music and poetry of the Parthenon and of the Greek style is an indispensable thing. If it were to be destroyed, I would feel sort of orphaned. But I have no interest in the religion that used to animate it. The cult of Pallas Athena is dead and void to me. So is the idea of Athenian imperialism. So are the so-called mysteries of Eleusis and the rest of it. All that's left for me are the schools of philosophy that are worth studying. So again, it's going to be a question: how do we assimilate what was to previous generations and previous religions and extinct faiths something so important? How do we keep the value that is innate in that without surrendering to the cults and illusions that so much animated it? These are very important cultural issues. Okay? And I submit that we can do it.
I believe myself that we can recover the lost connection, the one that monotheism severed between Athens and Jerusalem. And we could get back a world where philosophy was valued. The beauty of science was considered worth studying, worth revering even. Where literature would be the key to the study of ethics and morality. And if you wanted the transcendent, you'd have love and sex and music. And you wouldn't need any supernatural permission for any of this nonsense. I think I miss it terribly. I feel as if something was torn away from me before I was born by the loss of that. But we're smart enough to get it back. If only we will leave behind the hideous nonsense of the holy books and the vile preachments of those who want the world to come to an end. If you think that there's a creator who's made you specially and who watches over you and supervises you, who cares about you and wants you to do well and even wants you to survive death, I have to say, I think it's a preposterous proposition because I have to be honest, and an irrational one, and a fatuous one, and a sinister one, because the idea of wanting a father who never dies and won't quit is infantilizing. But suppose you did think that, shouldn't it make you happy? It doesn't make them happy. It doesn't make them better at all. They won't be happy till I believe it too. So the first principle is, separate that. Keep it to yourselves. Go to any church you like. Build any church you want. Do it with your own money. Don't ask the government to teach this stuff to my children in a government school. We won't have that. And surely, in other words, I don't, when I'm offended by a filthy article I read about atheists and Jews and secularists, I have to, bombardments of stuff of this kind comes at me all the time. I don't go out and burn down the nearest mosque because I've been offended, do I? Don't be ridiculous. But I'm supposed to respect those who do such things. I'm supposed to treat them with an extra delicacy. Why should I be doing that? Who's the offended one here, really? I'm not going to make a big point about my feelings being hurt. I have a thick skin, I have a broad back, I've studied Socrates, I think the Socratic method's more convincing. But you act as if I'm the one who's offending them by saying, I find your beliefs actually rather unconvincing. And in any case, I'm not going to have them forced on me. Now, is that finally clear? Is it? I hope so. Good.
I just want to assure those of you who are religious here that our purpose is not to offend you this morning, but I will nevertheless repay your hospitality by telling you exactly what I think about religion. Now, as someone who spent the last 2 years criticizing religious faith, I've become quite familiar with how people of faith rise to the defense of God. As it turns out, there are not 100 ways of doing this. There appear to be just 3. Either you argue that a specific religion is true, or you argue that religion is useful, or you attack atheism as intolerant, elitist, or otherwise corrosive of basic human values. Now, the only line of argument that is relevant to this debate, or indeed any debate about the validity of religion, is an argument that religion is true. Or rather, that one religion is true, because of course they can't all be true. In fact, our opponents here stand for 2 distinct and mutually incompatible faiths. Was Jesus Christ the Messiah? The Rabbi and Dinesh are not likely to agree on that point. As Bertrand Russell pointed out over 100 years ago, even if we knew one of the Earth's religions was true, perfectly true, given the multiplicity of faiths, given their mutual incompatibility, all believers should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. And I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay. Perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay. So God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay, he engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Beliefs are not like clothing. Okay? Comfort and utility and attractiveness cannot be our conscious criteria for adopting them. To believe a proposition, you have to believe that you have good reasons for believing it. And the effect that this belief will have on your life cannot be among those reasons. And this is what it is to be clouded by bias. This is why we have phrases like wishful thinking and self-deception. To really believe that there is a God is also to believe that you stand in some relation to his existence, such that if he didn't exist, you wouldn't believe in him. How does the supposed usefulness of religion fit into this scheme? It doesn't. So let's return to this question of truth. It's very common for people to say there's no conflict between religion and science because they relate to different subject matters. Okay, this is a lie. Religion and science both make claims about the way the world is. They make incompatible claims about the same reality, and they make these claims based on very different standards of evidence and modes of argument. It should be quite clear that there's a conflict, a perfect conflict, between demanding good evidence for what you believe and being satisfied with bad evidence or no evidence. So religion and science are in conflict because there's no way to disentangle religious and scientific truth claims. The claim that Jesus was born of a virgin, say, it's a central claim to Christianity. It is also a claim about biology. The claim that he rose from the dead and will return to earth is a claim about history. It's a claim about the human survival of death. It's a claim apparently about human flight without the aid of technology. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, while they disagree on many things, all agree that on the day of judgment, every person who has ever lived will be physically resurrected. Just which scientific laws does this violate? One's tempted to say all of them. If the basic claims of religion are true, science is so blind to this underlying reality, and the laws of nature are so susceptible to supernatural modification as to render the whole enterprise of science ridiculous. If, on the other hand, the basic claims of religion are false, most of the people on this planet are profoundly confused about the nature of reality and beset by quite irrational hopes and fears. And many people are simply wasting their lives and spreading delusion, often with tragic results. It seems to me no thinking person can be indifferent between the two sides of this dichotomy. Now, it's often imagined that non-believers like myself must be in principle closed to spiritual life. This is not true. You can have a deep spiritual and ethical life without lying to yourself or to your children about the nature of reality, without pretending to know things you do not know. There's nothing that prevents a non-believer from experiencing ecstasy and self-transcending love and rapture and awe. In fact, there's nothing that prevents a non-believer from going into a cave and practicing meditation for a year like a proper mystic. What non-believers don't tend to do is make unjustified and unjustifiable claims about the nature of the cosmos and about the divine origin of certain books on the basis of those experiences. That is a difference worth noticing. So I want to suggest to you that whatever is true about our circumstance, ethically and spiritually, can be discovered now and can be talked about in language compatible with our growing scientific understanding of the world and of the human mind. Whatever discoveries are there to be made about how to maximize human well-being can be talked about in language that is not an outright affront to all that we've come to know in the last 2,000 years. And to subscribe to one of the Iron Age religions, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is to make the tacit claim that that is impossible, that there is, in fact, no way to understand our circumstance using the tools of our modern understanding of the world, that some measure of superstition is necessary, some measure of mythology, that we have to lie just this much. The point is, we can place our confidence only in human conversation. And the question is, do you want to place it in a 21st century conversation where we have all of the world's literature and learning available to us? Or do you want to place it in a first century conversation or a 7th century conversation as preserved in one of our holy books? Okay, and please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay, we're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good. But when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because he visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath, okay, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, who can understand God's will? Okay, and yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish his goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life, and we're told that God is good. Okay, but when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, this is how you play tennis without the net. Okay, and I want to suggest to you that it is not only tiresome when otherwise intelligent people speak this way, it is morally reprehensible.
I'll just ask our audience a question, first of all, if you'd raise your hands. How many of you believe in God? Okay, a forest of hands. So, Richard Dawkins, these people are deluded. Every single one of them.
Well, I fear that's right, yes. I would say it's rather like the phenomenon of the imaginary friend that children have and that comfort them and console them. But there's actually not the slightest shred of evidence that any kind of supernatural being exists. So I'm sorry to say, deluded, yes.
Deluded. How can so many people be wrong?
Well, there was a time when everybody believed that the world was flat. There was a time when everybody believed that the sun whizzed round the earth. People are very, very frequently deluded. And by the way, of course, there was a time when people believed in Zeus and Apollo, and in other parts of the world they believed in Thor and Wotan. People have believed in fairies and leprechauns. Everybody in this room, I would guess, knows what it's like not to believe in the God of some other religion. You know that if you happen to be born in the Middle East, you'd probably be Muslim. And people who are born in the Middle East believe equally fervently in their God. They can't both be right. There are so many different gods that people have believed in throughout history.
So what people believe is really an accident of geography?
Exactly right, yes.
Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings. Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods? It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation. And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve. And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism, that wants to worship and that wants a boss, that wants a celestial dictatorship. And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization. And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, I mean, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other, but it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic, like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time.
I actually...
Why shouldn't there be something? As you say, if there wasn't, then we wouldn't be here. But the question, why is there something rather than nothing, the origin of the something, the origin of the cosmos, was, I suspect, an extremely simple event. And simple events are very simple to understand and explain. Once upon a time, not that long ago, a couple of centuries ago, the question would not have been, why is there something rather than nothing? The question would have been, why is there all this magnificent life? Why are there trees? Why is there grass? Why are there birds? Why are there humans? Darwin answered that question and blew out of the water the theistic answer to that question. Theists are now driven back to this much, much more simple question: why is there something rather than nothing? Everything else is either explained or well on the way to being explained. We're left with just one little tiny smidgen of a gap in which God is alleged to be hiding. But even if you invoke a supernatural creator to explain why is there something rather than nothing, you still explained absolutely nothing, because you're left without an explanation for that God himself.
Every second that we're speaking, a star the size of our sun or bigger goes out, blows up or goes out. That's been the case every single second since the first moment of the Big Bang. It's a lot. That'll be a lot of suns going out as we speak. And there's a lot of annihilation, isn't it? There's a lot of destruction. It's a rather what you might call almost a wasteful scale. It does have the positive outcome, though, that we are all constituted of those materials. We are made of stardust. Now, I find that a rather more majestic and wonderful and even beautiful idea than, say, the idea of the burning bush. A bit more impressive. Gives you more to think about.
Are they mutually exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive? Did God make you a stardust?
One has the virtue of being true and provable and studyable, which the other doesn't. And I do think that the verifiability of something is a virtue of
Are we
kind.
simply material then?
Yes. We don't have bodies. We are bodies. Until 50,000 years ago, there were 4 other kinds of biped, humanoid, not unlike us, still living on the planet, died leaving no descendants. We're the only survivors of those people. That family were the last. We don't know if they had gods or not.
So you think the inexplicable...
No religion ever invented appears to have known that these creatures even existed, because the religious are forced to believe that the only really significant event that happened in the human story happened about 3,000 years ago.
Do you think there could be one sentence that could convince, let's say, a creationist to seriously doubt their theory? Ideally, if you could convince a believer in God to really doubt their belief, but that's too hard.
Not sure about a sentence. I think perhaps the single most convincing fact, the observation that you could point to, would be the pattern of resemblances that you see when you compare the genes using modern DNA techniques, actually looking at the letter-to-letter correspondences between genes. Compare the genes of any pair of animals you like, pair of animals, pair of plants, and then plot out the resemblances, and they fall in a perfect hierarchy, a perfect family tree. And the only alternative to it being a family tree is that the intelligent designer deliberately set out to deceive us in the most underhand and devious manner. Moreover, the same thing works with every gene you do separately, and even pseudogenes that don't do anything but are vestigial relics of genes that once did something. I find it extremely hard to imagine how any creationist who actually bothered to listen to that could possibly doubt the fact of evolution. But they don't listen. I mean, your question is a perfectly good question, but it's not really relevant, because what they do is simply stick their fingers in their ear and say la la la. They know what's true because it's in the holy book. And that even, I mean, the most extreme case is the geologist Kurt Wise, who has a PhD in geology from Harvard, and said, if all the evidence in the universe pointed towards an old Earth, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a young Earth creationist, because that is what Holy Scripture teaches me. You cannot argue with a mind like that. A mind like that, it seems to me, is, well, a disgrace to the human species.
You're right that science has made many things more comprehensible to us, and it's explained things that religion used to take credit for. In other words, now we know there's a germ theory of disease. Diseases are not curses or revenges from heaven. Same with earthquakes and so on. The stuff they used to teach us, and many of them still do, is nonsense. Evil nonsense as well as ignorant nonsense. But it's also taught us, just in my lifetime, an enormous amount more about how little we know. We're much, much more ignorant than people who lived before Galileo. Because we have now an increasingly large idea of the fantastic expanse of the unknown. That's precisely the moment at which to say that skepticism is what's necessary. Inquiry, debate, doubt. Where's faith in this? Where's the usefulness of faith there? There's no use to it at all. Socrates, who, as far as I know, existed but may well not have done, it doesn't matter to me. No one will insult me if they say, Socrates, your great hero, didn't exist. Try it on a Muslim, try it on a Christian. Their prophets didn't exist. Or tell people that Moses is a myth. They start hurling themselves about, making menacing noises very often. Socrates said, you're only educated when you've understood how ignorant you are. And you're only going to even find that out by doubting everything all the time. There's all the difference in the world between that outlook and that mentality, and the mentality of faith. And second, on metaphysics, which I noticed, take refuge in several times already this evening, like what is love? Is something poetic or is it prosaic? Very good questions, but metaphysical ones. Those who say God exists and intervenes in the world, in other words, those who say there is a religious God, the God of religion, are saying that redemption is on offer to human beings, that salvation is on offer to them, and that if they reject the offer, they can be in really big trouble. Now, don't start talking to an audience like this, or, if you don't mind, to a debate partner like me, as if religion was a private matter, because everybody knows that if it was, there wouldn't be anything to argue about. It's precisely because it claims to be a total solution, a complete solution to all problems, available on pain of death, sometimes, in some forms, but available to you if you'll only have enough faith. Where we've just found out that faith is probably the most overrated of the virtues and the one least useful to us in the real dilemmas that we actually have to face.